Hello, welcome to our ninth segment of our morality course on DVD. And as you know, we're walking through some specific moral issues during this part of our course. This segment deals with the sacredness of human life, respect for human life, which our Catholic Church is probably more famous for this moral issue than any other. And it's becoming, really, it has become a political issue, a real powerful political issue over the last 15, 20, 25 years. So we want to really look at this issue, talk about what it is grounded in, and talk about its implications for us. Right up front, I want to tell you that this is probably one of the most complex moral issues that we're going to be talking about in this entire course. In our little 25 to 30 minute segment on DVD here, we're certainly not going to be able to cover everything that's at play in this issue, certainly not with a whole lot of depth. I hope to give you as much as I can of a foundation, but really would encourage you to make sure that you read your handouts and look at the recommended readings that we have so that you can kind of further and deepen your knowledge about this. I want to start again with a kind of a situation. Imagine that you're the parent of a teenage girl that's been raped. You don't know who the rapist is. You know, the person is gone out of the scene. This is only a day or two after this has happened. She is physically okay, but you're worried about whether she might be pregnant. It seems like that the worst thing that could happen would be that your daughter would be carrying the child of a rapist. It would just redouble the harmful effects of the rape. It would be a kind of trauma on trauma. So as a parent, what do? There would be a lot of doctors that might advise you to have your daughter take this. It's a kind of a morning after pill. It's called RU-486 that if taken at the right time, they say, will make sure that the pregnancy is taken care of, if there is a pregnancy. Is that morally okay? Or is it a problem? Would it be immoral? Difficult to say. You know, we talked about conflicting values. You've got the love of your daughter, you've got the concern, you've got the fear of pregnancy, and then on the other side you've got the possibility of a life there. And there's a confusion a little bit about what this pill actually does. Does it extinguish a life, or does it just make sure that life doesn't happen? Does it interrupt the process of conception, or does it work after conception? These are all issues that I'm sure that there have been people that have dealt with this. Where does a Catholic go with this? How do we know how to act? The questions that come up in this are, when does human life begin? Do we have a right to make whatever decision we feel like is necessary in these cases? Is there a lesser of two evils at play here? And sometimes we're confronted with kind of a conflict between science, what the doctor might tell us to do, and our faith. all of this is kind of beginning a discussion of what does it mean to be pro-life. We as Catholics are pro-life. It's an integral part of our moral teachings, of our moral sense as Catholics. And it's getting stronger all the time. What does it mean to be pro-life? Another little situation. You're on a jury. It happens to be a murder trial. This person, who's got a long criminal record, was out on parole, and in a kind of just a traffic stop, shoots and kills a police officer, cold blood. You're on the jury, you're in the trial, the person's convicted. Do you vote for the death penalty? As a Catholic, if we're pro-life, can we support the death penalty? Is that different from, say, destroying an innocent human life in the womb? This person who's committed a crime, a terrible crime of murder, they're not innocent. They deserve, maybe, to be executed. Can we say there's a difference between those two lives? That's part of the quandary here somewhat in terms of being pro-life. How far do we take this? Another situation. Your wife has terminal cancer. She's going to die in a month. She's in great pain. It's the cost of her hospitalization is really wrecking the family. She has no quality of life to speak of at all. She's just wasting away. She actually asks to be put out of her misery. Values in conflict. As a Catholic, being pro-life, can we choose the way we die and when we die? Can we help someone die with dignity, as they say? Or do we have to let the natural process take care of itself? These are all questions that are part of this issue. Now, and there's a lot of other questions that are part of this issue too. And I think one of the things we do, as we've kind of looked in some of these different moral issues, is we go to Scripture and say, what does Scripture say? And I think maybe someone's initial reaction would be, well, what if Scripture's not going to say a whole lot about this? You know, what does Scripture say about abortion? I don't think that comes up, does it? What does Scripture say about, euthanasia? Scripture actually kind of supports the death penalty in some ways. What does Scripture really say about the whole pro-life issue? Does Scripture tell us to be pro-life? Or is that something that over the centuries our Catholic magisterium, the Pope and the bishops, have seen and kind of through the process of discerning natural law, they've seen that to be a value that we have to uphold. Well, really, Scripture does say a lot to us about being pro-life. It doesn't use those terms specifically, but say in Genesis, it says very clearly in Genesis chapter 1, God is the author of life, the creator and owner of life. We don't own our own lives. We are the caretakers of our lives. When God creates in Genesis, He creates and it is good. And He sets human beings kind of as the caretakers of the rest of creation. Makes human beings responsible for one another. The murder of Cain and Abel is seen as a real evil. In the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. The Catechism gets into these specific human life, pro-life or respect life issues very clearly in paragraphs 2258 and following. So 2258 and after that deals with a lot of these principles. One of the principles that we've talked about before in this course is that human life is a good in itself. Human life is sacred. All life has value, but human life is set above as being sacred. So you can't really put an animal, the life of an animal, on an equal par with the life of a human being. It's immoral, evil, to directly take human life. That is clear in the Old Testament and even more clear in the New Testament, and especially clear in the Catechism. To directly take human life is an evil. We must value and protect life. Now, how we apply this is really some of our problem and some of the issues, because it's gotten real complicated as science has really grown and expanded. We talk about genetic engineering these days, which 100 years ago they would have not even known what you were talking about. There are they play with life in the laboratory these days. Where do we come down on those issues? And the church has tried very hard to help science determine how to follow that path of respecting life and yet progress. God has a God-given plan for human life, and we can discover it. Those are some of the basic principles, I think, that we would be looking at in terms of human life. And I want to kind of look at how we might apply some of those, and how the church, in the Catechism especially, has made those applications. One of the applications is that human life begins at conception. So coming out of that, abortion at any point in the pregnancy would be an evil that we just, the church tells us it's an intrinsic evil. So abortion is wrong. Even though, as kind of our situation was in the letter with the girl who was raped, it may look like, well, we can get rid of this, we can take care of it. It might be a lot worse if she were pregnant from a rapist. You don't want to punish the life of the child within the womb for something it wasn't responsible for. So to abort that child, if there were a child there, would be wrong. And it might not be an easy thing to allow that life to grow in the womb, but it's the kind of thing that, even though it might be difficult, we're called to do in order to honor the life that's there. Embryonic stem cell research, which has been a real battle over the last year or two, even in elections, is immoral, because it always involves the destruction of fertilized embryos, which are, even though they are tiny, it's human life. Because we really can't say that there's not a life there, even though it's in its tiniest and earliest formative stages. If an embryo is fertilized, well, if it's an embryo, it is fertilized, but if an egg is fertilized, it is a human life, and we have to value that as much as we would value any human life at any stage of life. The unjustified taking of human life is immoral, and so any kind of Murder is immoral. Killing someone, killing another human being is an evil act. Suicide, if the person is aware and conscious, is immoral. It's a very difficult thing to even think that anybody might be aware or conscious who is committing suicide. I don't think very many of us would hold that person responsible. But if they were, say, maybe a terrorist, aware and making a choice, they were going to kill themselves for a cause or something, that would be immoral. Now, what I said was the unjustified taking of life. So, when is it justified? We're justified to take human life in the cases of self-defense. If we're faced with two evils, and we choose the lesser of two evils, maybe there's a drug-crazed, gun-toting person who's broken into our house, and the only way we have of defending our family is to use force against that person. Maybe we just have to shoot to kill. There was a case of that just in the news this last couple of weeks where a security guard at a church had to kill someone. This person had broken into the church with a couple of guns and was starting to shoot people. So the security guard, although I'm sure she was a Christian, the last thing she would want to do is kill someone that day, but in order to defend the rest of the people in church, felt justified and was justified in taking a human life there. But we have to be careful about what would justify it. Self-defense would be one. Defending our property would not be a justification for taking a life. You could maybe use force to defend your property, but not killing to defend property. Because you wouldn't want to value your property as highly as you would value another person's life. We get into a little bit more complex set of circumstances when we start talking about the means by which life is created must also be respected. This is a way of being pro-life. So genetic experiments would be something that we would have to be careful about. In other words, the church would tell us that there is such a thing as therapeutic genetic research that's trying to cure diseases, etc., but a kind of manipulation of genes for maybe to determine the sex of a child or to create a designer baby or whatever, that would be termed unjustified, because it's kind of playing God in a way. And the church really doesn't want us to get into playing God and acting like we're the owners of life and God is not. Cloning of human beings would be just immoral. It's kind of, again, it's playing God. Artificial insemination is a much more difficult area, but the church really has some restrictions there too, because the church really wants the creation of life to be the union of a man and a woman in intercourse, and not in a petri dish in a lab. Now, there's a lot more information about the whole artificial insemination area that's available, and I don't have really time now to get into that area very deeply, but I would encourage you, if you're kind of wondering about that or thinking about that, to look at some of the material in the handouts, and also really to contact us at the office if you want more information about that. But there are some restrictions there, and if you can see how the church wants us to really be careful about the means by which life is created and respect that is important. Self-defense is justified in war, and we're going to talk about in our course, we do talk about war and violence and what it takes for there to be a just war. Self-defense is kind of some of the same criteria as a just war. You know, it's allowed to use force to defend yourself, but only so much force as really needed. So to shoot somebody who's just threatened you would not be justified. But if your life is in danger, you would be justified to use whatever means that you needed to defend yourself. Hopefully the killing would never be the intention, though. Human life should not be used for monetary gain. I know that there are some people who fear this, and maybe it's done, where there's trafficking in human organs. Some people are even kidnapped and their organs are taken away. That, of course, would be immoral. We have, from especially Cardinal Bernardine, who is the former Archbishop Cardinal of the Diocese of Chicago, is now deceased, but he came up with a beautiful statement on the consistent ethic of life. And this is, I think, a way for us to really apply our principles of life through the life cycle, from womb to tomb. So basically what he's saying, and it kind of clarifies church teaching in the catechism somewhat, although this isn't in the catechism itself, but he's telling us we have to be pro-life all the way through life. We can't look at a criminal on death row as his life is less valuable than a baby in the womb. All life has equal value. The terminal cancer patient, the person on the street who's homeless, the person who, because of maybe a disability of some kind, is never going to have a so-called great quality of life. All life is valuable, and we have to give equal respect for life at any stage and any level, any quality. I hate to even talk about quality of life, because how do we even define that? But the Church definitely says that the dignity of human life doesn't depend on the so-called quality of life. Who's to say, though, that the quality of life of someone who we might look down on or say, oh, we might even pity that person, who's to say their quality of life is any less than any of us? They may well be living the life of a saint much more than any of us are. So euthanasia, the whole Dr. Kevorkian thing, where people are sort of given a choice to bail out on life if they've got a bad situation or a terminal disease or whatever, that is immoral, never allowed. We are not, because God is the author of life, and God is the owner of life, we're not allowed to choose the time and way that we're going to die. Human life must be preserved by ordinary means. Now this is getting into a different question in a way. When we talk about preserving human life, we're not talking about actually directly taking life. We're talking about if someone is dying, what do we have to go through in order to keep them alive? We go back to the cancer patient. If someone has cancer, what do we have to do? Do they have to take every treatment possible, no matter what the expense, no matter how difficult it is or how painful it is, in order to keep them alive a little longer? Or can we at a certain point let nature take its course? That's the real question here. And the Church says, and this is real good common sense, that we have to use ordinary means to preserve life. So what's ordinary? Something, as the Church would say, ordinary means accessible. You can get it easily. Affordable. It's not something that really is over the top in terms of expense. And effective. So for instance, if I have pneumonia, I have to do what I can to get whatever kind of medicines to cure that disease. It could kill me if I don't. So if I just let the nature take its course, I could die from pneumonia. But because the medical field has plenty of, has the ability, it's accessible, it's affordable, and it's effective, the means to cure pneumonia, I have to take those means. But if I were a cancer patient, and I had used the ordinary means, I maybe went through some radiation, went through some chemotherapy, and nothing was effective, at a certain point, I could let the cancer take its course. So I think the church is kind of saying there that if we are dying, that we have the, and that's a conscious decision there, which way we go, or what would be ordinary, what would be extraordinary, but we can let it happen. The point that's been in the news a number of times over the last, I say, 10, 15 years is what happens if a person is in a persistent vegetative state? In other words, they've been in a car accident, they've been in a coma, and there's no brain activity for a year or 2 years, and they're just laying there wasting away. What do we have to do? Do we have to keep them alive? Can we unplug the machines? Sometimes you get into a hospital and it's just one thing after another. They won't give up on a person. And we've had different cases. The Terry Schiavo case was fairly famous in the last 5 or 6 years on that very issue. What do we have to do? Do we have to keep that person alive? And the church has said, well, we can withdraw a respirator, any kind of artificial means of keeping a person alive. It's okay to withdraw that if we've determined that they really are in a persistent vegetative state. But it's becoming more and more clear with some of the statements that are coming from the Pope that nutrition and hydration we have to give the person. In other words, we have to give them water. We have to give them food, even though it might be a feeding tube that we use, as long as it's effective and not harming the patient. In the handouts that you've received, there's a handout that summarizes the Gospel of Life, which is an encyclical that Pope John Paul II wrote in the 90s. Really a very good statement about this whole issue of pro-life. So I really encourage you to take a look at that. And I think if we go back to our situation where the teenage girl was raped, we could see that if this RU 486 is destroying a fertilized egg, then it's an evil, it's abortion. I don't know how we determine that. The whole pro-life movement is very much against the RU 486 for a number of reasons, but not wanting to take a chance to destroy a human life. So there, again, even though it's a difficult thing, I think we would want to make a choice in favor of life and avoid that evil of abortion. Our church looks at Deuteronomy and would offer us the quote from Deuteronomy that says, "Choose life. I put life and death in front of you. Choose life."